Today we are going to take a look at the industrial IoT and specifically learn how industrial IoT vendors like Softing Industrial Automation are adding a recurring revenue component to their product portfolio. So I want to introduce my guests today. We have Dr. Christopher Anhalt, who is Business Development Manager at Softing Industrial Automation, and we have Jam Khan, who's the VP of Professional Services here at Gemalto Software Monetization Business Unit. Before I start, I can already see that some of you are interacting with this window. I want to draw your attention to there's a questions chat window on the webinar control panel. You're all muted, but please feel free to submit your questions anytime. I will be moderating these, and I will either interrupt the presenters throughout, or I will save the questions for the end. We'll see how the session goes. There will be a recording of this session shared with everyone. So I already see people asking, and they also already want to see the presentation. So we are going to dive right into that now. So you haven't seen any slides yet because Jam hasn't started sharing. So Jam, over to you. I think we're ready to start. Jam, yep, I can see your screen.
Thanks, Ariola. I hope you can see the screen.
Yes, we can.
Go into slideshow mode here. Wonderful. Thanks so much for the introduction, Ariola, and thanks for attending. You're always wondering, as you see all these people register and sign up, if anyone's actually going to show up, but it looks like we've got a pretty nice audience here, so hopefully we've got a nice session lined up for you today. I love this topic around business models for the IoT because it really allows us to kind of open up and think around different creative ways that people are looking to monetize their offerings. Coming from a software monetization space, it's obviously very relevant for us, but always very enlightening to hear both what the audience has to offer as well as what folks like Softing bring to the table, because there's no sort of limit to the creativity and what people are looking to do, taking advantage of what the combination of devices and connectivity are doing for the industrial IoT. So I'm going to start off by just talking about some market trends, and I hope this is more sort of axioms than trends, really. The level of adoption may vary, but I think as we go through some of these, you'll start to kind of realize that these are all things that are becoming relevant to every industry that's looking at IoT in some way or form. One notion that's becoming quite clear is that no matter what space you're in, hardware is becoming increasingly commoditized. That's not to say hardware is becoming any less relevant or any less important, but it's to say that the era where hardware is highly specialized and really a unique differentiator is starting to fade in a sense. You're seeing a growing revenue contribution from software, and software combined with hardware is really what's providing the unique selling proposition for a lot of vendors. And again, that's not to trivialize the hardware. You see a lot of trends around software that seem to indicate that hardware is no longer relevant. That's certainly not the case at all. But what we're seeing is a lot of the value and the incremental value and the additional streams of revenue are really driven through software. And we'll cover a number of reasons as to why that's becoming increasingly relevant for the industrial IoT. Another interesting aspect of this sort of hardware proliferation or the lower cost of hardware is the revenue erosion that comes from gray market abuse. When a lot of your IP sits in your software and when hardware is more easily replicable, you risk low-cost counterfeit copies, things that weren't as important when a lot of your specialization happened in the hardware. So even as we look to increase the value of our software and increase the uniqueness of our software, one has to be more concerned with what that means from an IP protection standpoint as well. The other part around this is how much of this behavior is driven by customers. The way we consume software has changed quite dramatically. Everyone talks about the sort of the App Store experience as kind of the flagship, but if you think about what that did for the consumer mindset, when the iPhone first came out, phones were all about being small, having a long battery life, and having reliable connectivity. The first iPhone had none of those three. But the battery life, remember, was terrible. The voice quality wasn't all that great, and it was a massive screen compared to what we were used to. What it had was that unique kind of app store experience. It enabled us to do different things that we didn't traditionally associate with the phone, and obviously the smartphone industry has kind of taken off from there. But what it also did for Apple was it allowed them to introduce a series of new business models. And for software publishers, it introduced this wonderful avenue to push your product through this sort of device that it seemed everybody had. And for Apple, it was a great way to increase their revenue stream by enabling that content. See, it's a great example of a device that took advantage of being highly available and being connected to kind of shift the business model and the industry and then kind of turn it around on its head. That's really what's happening in a lot of different segments. The industrial IoT is no different. There's several different areas where one can monetize in the IoT. You see a massive push towards ecosystem monetization. That's the enabling of these IoT-driven ecosystems, probably most prevalent in smart cities, smart energy, where there's a number of different devices and software platforms that are coming together to enable these IoT-driven initiatives. And for that, you need an ecosystem. So there's a host of vendors, suppliers, and integrators that are looking to just monetize the creation and the platforms of these ecosystems. Along with that, and along with all this connectivity, comes massive volumes of data. So monetizing data is nothing new. I mean, since we've been selling software, everyone's looking to get more data from their users and figure out how to turn that into either advertising-relating data or package up the data and be able to resell it. What's interesting about IoT, obviously, is the unprecedented levels of connectivity and the proliferation of devices we have just give us access to that much more data and that much more relevant data. So there's a whole sort of industry around just monetizing data where relevant, and then of course enabling IoT-driven initiatives requires a whole set of services, which are also becoming an industry unto itself. The focus for us, though, is on these traditional device vendors that have always sold a device and now are looking at emphasizing the value of the features on the device in addition to the device itself. We talked about hardware becoming commoditized, and hardware kind of at least can't be by itself the unique distinction. So how do you go about creating additional revenue streams and monetizing the device that you have and focusing on the value of the software? One of the things that we've been hearing today is software is everywhere. When you have a company like General Electric talking about software kind of driving everything, it does make you stop and pay attention. This isn't a trend. This isn't a buzzword. This is a reality. When Tesla wants to do a massive update to its cars, it does a over-the-air software update, and new features are enabled, new functionalities enabled. It wasn't that long ago that you wouldn't even fathom that happening in a car, and even now they're at the bleeding edge of it. But I think any one of us knows that that's not something that's going to be a unique thing to them, right? Everybody in the automobile industry is looking at seeing how they can monetize more of the software features, more of the data. The entire driving experience is being very much controlled by software as much as it is, the car itself. You don't pay attention to just what's unique in my vehicle. It's also the entire customer experience there. It's all software driven. What software driven means to a lot of device vendors is the ability to now look at new business models. There's nothing new that I'm showing on this slide here. For a long time, we've known that perpetual pricing has been the dominant way and still is the way people sell. It's what we've been inherently used to, coming up as, you want something, you buy it, you own it. Now we've got a generation that really isn't that used to ownership, and it's much more of a rental mentality. And that applies, across the board to all walks of life. We're much more used to just paying for what I need to use. Started off with subscription as a foot in the door, but the holy grail is just usage based. I want to be able to charge what's fair, and I want you to pay me for what I'm giving you, and as a customer, you want to pay for only what you use. It's just been a little bit trickier to do in the hardware model, where you're really used to, you create a device, you sell a device, and when when somebody buys a device, they expect they're going to own it. When you start shifting a little more into the software world, the idea of being able to potentially rent a device and get value out of the software becomes a lot more interesting. It's interesting for the consumer from the standpoint of being able to lower the entry point and come in and purchase at a lower point, but it's interesting to the seller as well from the standpoint that there's a predictable and recurring revenue stream. You're not looking at just new sales all the time, but you're looking at now adding more value to your existing customers. And this notion of focusing on value now becomes a benefit both to the customer as well as to the producer. Which kind of leads me into what value capture in the IoT is all about. If we think about traditional value capture, it's always been about selling the next device. And this kind of, includes, some commodity advantages. You kind of become, you want to become the de facto standard. You focus on that brand loyalty. I gave the Apple example. I mean, they've been for a long time kind of that flagship of having the customer loyalty, and they've really created a wonderful brand. But now you see it even as dominant as they are in a little bit of jeopardy, right? You can see a world where there is a lot more equality even in the smartphone world, right? Even a few years ago, we wouldn't have thought that Samsung would be as strong of a contender as they are now. And now you've got lower cost options coming in from vendors like Huawei that are really fighting the traditional notions of, things coming from China maybe of low quality. That's certainly not the case anymore. And you're seeing that relying purely on hardware and loyalty has its perils because it is easily replaceable as well. Once you buy a device, when you need to buy the next device, it's a green field for anyone and for competitive entrants. So now you start thinking about what that means for IoT-based value capture. And when your revenue isn't limited to the physical product sales, you're now looking at what the value you're continuously delivering is, what that software experience is. That becomes what attracts a consumer or a customer to your product. They're not looking at, I bought it and now I'm going to wait for the next big release. It's an ongoing conversation you have with your customers. And so beyond just the obvious predictable revenue streams and being able to create new revenue streams, you've also got now a selling model where your customers are expecting updates from you. They're expecting you to have an ecosystem of partners that are delivering more value. There's an overall feeling of value that's coming in from beyond just the hardware device, but it's coming through all these different revenue streams that you're not just selling directly, but through your hardware device, you're potentially opening up other vendors to come in and create additional value-added streams that are beneficial to them, beneficial to your customers, and that's a new way of creating brand loyalty. Is all around the ongoing services and the ongoing connection that you're creating, with your customer. With that said, I'll let you guys transition from trends and theories to really a real world use case. And I think Dr. Christopher Anhalt from Softing's got a wonderful set of slides about how Softing's applying this in the real world. So over to Dr. Anhalt.
Thank you, Jem. And Christopher, we can see your screen, so over to you.
Okay, sounds good. Well then, thank you, Ariella. Thank you, Jem, for setting here the stage in such a great way. And of course, thank you everyone for joining, and welcome also from me here. Licensing and new pricing models in the industrial IoT. So what am I going to talk about here in my presentation? I will show you one example here, one of our product families, which we call data feed, that we develop and market in the context of the industrial IoT and in the context of OPC technologies. I work for Softing. I assume that some of you have heard about Softing and maybe know our portfolio, but probably not all of you. So I plan to introduce this presentation with first shorter part, I think 3 slides, and give a really quick introduction into the company I work for and in the way how we monetize our products today. And then I have a second part where I will speak about trends, drivers in the IoT market, how we see them, what they mean for our portfolio, our product family, and what options we see, how to develop our pricing models and our monetization strategy further. Softing is a German company, holding actually mid-size company. In German we call that Mittelstand. We are based in a small town just outside Munich, in Haar near Munich. We are around since more than 30 years, nearly 40 years now. Public company since 2000, yearly revenue about 80 million and somewhere between 400 and 450 employees. As I just said, or as Ariella said, I work for one of the two big daughter companies, Softing Industrial, which is a specialist for industrial communication. So we understand all those communication protocols spoken in industrial communication networks and automation technology. And in this area we have one product family that we call data feed, which is most relevant now when we talk about the industrial IoT and OPC technologies. So what are these data feeds products doing? Just in a nutshell, they provide access to data sources in the automation network. You know, data source could be a controller, it could be a device, it could be a simple sensor, it could be a database. So all those data feed products connect to those data sources, gather data, and feed those data into software applications. Software applications, again, could be a simple database where we just write data. It could be a SCADA system, or it could be a fancy, sophisticated new thing running in the cloud. So this is what data feed products do. A bit more specifically here, we have a purely software product that we call Data Feed OPC Suite. Can be installed on any standard PC, and it's doing what I just described, gathering data from an automation network and providing it for a software application. We have hardware products here in the middle, which are functionally really doing similar same thing, just in hardware. You know, some customers prefer not to depend on a standard PC, not to depend on IT department, maybe hardware self-contained, you install it and it's doing everything it's supposed to do. So we have those products. And what you see here at the right-hand slide, we have OPC toolkits. So these are toolkits which are used by developers in situations where an OPC server or maybe an OPC client has to be custom built. Specific needs, specific requirements a standard product doesn't do. For those situations we have toolkits. So what is the current pricing model that we have in place, and what are our revenue streams for these different products? So let me maybe begin then with the toolkits, the right-hand side. Our toolkits, they are controlled by license, but essentially our revenue is based on services. So if a customer wants to use this product fully functionally in the runtime environment, then we ask the customer to sign a service contract, mandatory for 3 years, and then optional, of course, extensions year by year. And then the customer can work with this, with these toolkits. That's the model for the toolkits. Already recurring revenue, services-based, services maintenance contract. For the hardware product, it depends. They come in different flavors, as you see here. One is one type of hardware product is really basic, simple, a fixed feature set. For that one, the UA gate, as it is called here, UA taken from OPC UA. We have a fixed price, and we have more advanced hardware products, more capabilities. Name is Echo Collect, and for these products we actually have optional features that can be licensed depending on individual needs, project needs. So the customer has to get a license file which controls which features are available, and that's how it works for this type of hardware product. For the software product, our OPC suite, it's probably the most complex pricing we have in place today, and for that I switch to my next slide, which is basically the price list as it looks today. You can find that also when you take a look at our web page. So you see here quite a few optional features that we provide here. Connectivity to different types of PLCs, connectivity to different types of clients, some sort of functionality in between, sometimes we call it middleware functionality. So a customer really can choose and pick what is needed for a given situation and license that. Or we provide an option if a customer is saying, hey, I need a lot of that, or I'm not 100% sure what I need, I just get everything, then we have a license data feed suite here in the bottom line, which allows the customer to use everything that we have here in this product.
Christopher.
So that's the product portfolio today and how we license that. Yes, Ariella?
Sorry, I was jumping in with a question because I just wanted to bring this, this is a good example of what Jam started talking about, right, about this value creation for customers, and this looks like a very customizable type of pricing model. Maybe you can help the audience with some more information about how many of your customers today buy the entire suite and how many of them are actually picking and choosing different sort of to license individual features. Do you have data that you could share?
Yeah, I can share that. I mean, we actually have a fairly high number of customers picking individual features and licenses. So I just gave this example. Here you see a Siemens controller that we can connect to Rockwell, B&R, Modbus, Mitsubishi. Hardly any customer uses all of those. The customer has typically one or maybe two. So it's really a usual situation that the customer doesn't need all of that. And yeah, regarding numbers, if I'm not mistaken, we have roughly 80–85% of our customers going for individual features, and roughly 15% just buying the entire suite.
Wow, interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, one more piece actually, what I can add. I mean, it hasn't been, that model hasn't been like that always. You know, we are selling here OPC server software products now since more than 10 years, 15 years, maybe longer than I worked for Softing. And we introduced that pricing for optional features where a customer can choose about 3 years ago. So not really recent, but we haven't done that since the beginning.
Can I just ask you another one as a question from the audience? And then how do you manage this if a customer wants some functions or the extended functionality? So is this, how do you actually manage to do that, give them different types of I guess, of requirements?
Well, first of all, of course, we get a customer from the order, which specifies the order number. You know what you see here in the left-hand column. And then it depends, you know, we offer the option to use dongle or a software license. So by the way, I didn't mention that, and I really wanted to say that. We use Gemalto technology to control all of that. So glad I remembered that and could say that. So we have the option, customer can pick a dongle license or a software license. And then, of course, we have our internal processes that we deliver as needed. It's possible that the customer at a later point of time decides to upgrade the license, to add a feature, that can be done as well. Yeah.
And one more on this one, and again, you tell me if you want to address it or you want to leave it for the end. Someone is asking, does the price change? It's an interesting question, on the number of users or size of company for any given combo or functionality. So maybe it's a sort of a general question on how you package your price, I guess, yeah?
I think if I understand the question correctly, we really have a fixed price for each order number that you see here, but per order number, the price doesn't depend on any other factors like company size or whatever. It's a price for an order number, and then you sum it up, and that's it.
All right, thanks. No more questions at this point.
Okay, so that was then the first part here, status quo, and where we are today. So let me speak a little bit about trends and how we see it, and what they mean specifically for this data feed product portfolio and maybe for the future. So let me begin here with a slide that I copied from a McKinsey paper. It's maybe a bit small, the typo. I hope that you can still read it. Industrial IoT Solution Stack. The model, the paper, actually it's an interesting paper. I can recommend it. To just Google mapping the value beyond the hype. So that's where I took that from. Yeah, it's a model to describe IoT solutions, different layers that make up the entire solution. You know, hardware, automation technology at the bottom, some kind of infrastructure platform in between, and then in the upper layer, software, and maybe even services. And in a way, it really picks up what Jen said early in his part, talking about trends. So when you look at those green and orange arrows, you see green arrow meaning increasing value, increasing revenue for basically everything that's software, and rather orange arrows behind what is hardware. So that is one aspect here. This slide, by the way, is also nice to discuss some ecosystems, in the sense that different layers here in this model can come from different suppliers, from different players, and it's a nice way to discuss who's partner, you know, who's competitor, what's your own position. And that's last but not least, that's the reason why I bring this slide here. It's also a nice way to explain where we are playing with our data portfolio and what this means for us. So when you look at this slide here, you have this connectivity layer, fairly down near the bottom. I took this IoT stack, simplified it a little bit. You see that here in the right-hand slide, and where you saw this connectivity layer, basically I put data feed. So this is where we are playing with our data feed portfolio. As I explained already in the beginning, we have connectivity to what is usually called operational technology, OT, and on the other hand, we have connectivity to IT. So IT, OT convergence, IT, OT integration is one of those buzzwords that probably many of you have heard when talking about the IoT or Industry 4.0. So this is where we are sitting in this context with our data feed portfolio. So what does it mean then here, this picture for us, and what are the trends? I mean, obviously, as mentioned now, software is becoming more important. Software is increasingly important for the value in the entire solution. And software is also, let's say, the area, the IT area where the innovation is happening, where innovation cycles are short, where things are moving fast, where maybe customers don't know today what they need or want to deploy in 2 or 3 years, as opposed to the operation technology at the bottom, which is moving slower. It's moving, but it's moving much slower. You have slower innovation cycles and less changes down there. So why am I telling you all of that? If you now look at take this closer look, it means that beyond this, let's say, simple requirement of connectivity, supporting a protocol to connect to OT and supporting maybe a separate protocol to connect to IT, we see additional requirements to add software capabilities in this data feed, in this layer with our data feed products. Requirements, additional software capabilities that we can call middleware. You know, you have features like server aggregation. You want to combine different data sources into one interface for software application. You want to model these data structures to simplify integration efforts to help the end customer protect investments. And you, last but not least, want to add features to add security. So I of course can't go into all of that here in detail. Talking about this picture and what's behind that would fill easily another presentation. I'm saying all this just to give you a little bit of the background why also for us, fairly down here in this entire solution, we see definitely an increasing need for software or firmware capabilities. Last but not least, as I'm talking a lot about software, and that's something we have to take into account. For many customers, hardware here is still justified, and we don't expect that to go away. So we are working here on the edge. Some of you who know cloud computing may have heard or know the term edge computing. So this is where this is happening, and this is a technology that cannot easily be just implemented in software and deployed in the cloud. We are talking about here edge, and we are talking about functionality that's at least for some customers still should be delivered in hardware. So that's one, let's say, one aspect talking about trends. Software firmware features are becoming more important for what we do on this layer. The second aspect to look at trends and market drivers is the customer perspective. What does all this mean for our customers? Or let's say, how do we interact with our customers when we talk about the more innovative IoT solutions and situations? One first observation is that the buying center for these solutions and for what we are selling is becoming more complex, and for many customers is in transition. So traditionally, when we sold those products, our products just to fill a database, that was often just inside the OT layer, and that's it. Fairly simple, not really complicated sales cycle. But this has changed. We have often IT business people that we see here. In many cases, they are those who would drive actually the project, decide about budgets and investment. We sometimes see that procurement plays a role. They may say, please use cloud-based applications whenever possible. We want to reduce capital expenditures, use cloud deployment whenever possible. But still, of course, we talk to the OT guys, people from the automation department, because typically they are those who are still in charge of providing data that are needed in all these fancy new applications. So that's one aspect. And the second aspect is that depending on the situation where we are, it really can be a solution sale driven by the application, where the end customer is not really that interested in the data integration portion. Or we have customers who look at this data integration layer as really a strategic technology, enabling technology layer, and they have a separate sales cycle for that. So the good news, so to say, for us is all points into a direction of software. The thing that makes it a bit difficult for us is that we really see different situations depending on the specific situation we are in.
And Christopher, can I just ask you, because we're talking about IoT and that's the topic of our webinar, and I also find this is a buzzword that we're all interested in using, right? But it sort of probably means different things for different people. And so from your experience, are you being approached for IoT specific projects? Are they real, or is this in trial stage? Are they more looking for you to consult? What's your experience with IoT projects with your customers?
No, we definitely see real big IoT projects out there. I mean, as I said, it's a mix. We have very traditional situations where we sell to OT people only, and it's an application that I wouldn't want to label IoT. We have other situations where people start to investigate and they get one license for a small trial. But we definitely have sales where people go full-fledged, so to say, for big IoT solutions and use that technology for bigger installations. So one of our nicer deals last year was a big global player in the food industry, and they defined a new architecture for all their, I think, about 150, 200 plants worldwide. and they plan to, or started to roll out 3 different IoT applications, energy management, OEE, and quality management, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, there were actually those who had this cloud-first policy from procurement, and they were evaluating this data integration layer as a separate technology component, so that separate sales cycle for that. And yeah, to come back to your question, we definitely see big IoT solutions for what I just described is real and relevant and clearly beyond trial status.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you, Christopher.
Okay, so then let me continue maybe with options and our current status of thinking how we can further develop our product pricing and how we can proceed here in the future. I have here one first bullet, so to say, that I call basics. As I explained, we have maintenance contracts for some of our products, but not for all. Some of our features are optional, but that's also something we can extend. So that's something that's to some extent available today, and that will be further extended, that we think about more optional features and extend maintenance contracts probably also to software products that are not covered today, since they become more complex, more value added is by the software products. So that's a natural step to do that. More interesting maybe is the question how we look at pricing models that are typically called software as a service. As I said, with our technology, for the time being, we are not running in the cloud, we are on the edge. On the other hand, we have situations where we are just part of a bigger solution with applications that are running in the cloud and applications that are based with a software as a service pricing model, that are priced with such a model. And in that situations, and I think Jan, you had this also as a point on one of your slides, look for partners, how do they price? We have situations where it would be a natural fit and good for the customer if our products would be also available with such a pricing model, because then it just matches the application part that's already coming based on such a model. The second situation where a transition to software as a service model definitely is an option and makes sense is that we sometimes talk to customers who look at our products as a services enabler. So services not in the sense of software as a service, but service maybe in the sense of remote service for remote maintenance, remote network monitoring, things like that. And we can provide data with our technology that would allow a machine builder, for example, to add services and of course then have a pricing model that's services per year, such a pricing model. And if we are in such a situation, then it also would make perfect sense not to have a flat price for our technology, but to have a yearly or services-based pricing. Last but not least, I mean, I'm saying we are not in the cloud. Doesn't mean that this has to stay like this in the future. You know, we sometimes talk about possibilities that control from the cloud, controller technology can move to the cloud. So there may be future more complex system architectures where part of what we call data integration moves into the cloud. Then it would be a natural step to adopt such a service, software as a service model.
Christopher, can I just ask you a question about pricing models? Okay, so you did address already, I think there were a couple of questions before about do you have a cloud-based software and what specific price models do you have cloud-based software, and I think you just mentioned those, so I'm assuming these were addressed. Sorry?
No, go ahead, sorry.
Yes. And then another question to do with pricing is, do you find that your customers are using this pricing flexibility to often change from one license model to another, or is this recurring revenue mainly based on a regular fee for always and then the same license? How do you want to sort of comment on that?
Frankly, I'm not 100% sure if I understood that question. I mean, right now, it's not really recurring, frankly, for what we are doing with our OPC suite here, at least. For some software products, we have a maintenance contract, which is a recurring component, so to say, but for the time being, it's a price the customer pays, and that's it. Or maybe, Aurelia, you could rephrase the question because I misunderstood.
Yes, I think you're right. I think it was more about maybe the flexibility that you had discussed before in selecting various.
Maybe I will come back to that point in the summary. I mean, flexibility is definitely a point, and it's a keyword since, as I said, we have still quite traditional customers who are certainly not interested in additional flexible pricing models like software as a service that allow the customer to scale up and down depending on the actual demand. But for other customers, this will become relevant. And I say this is an option for the future. We are thinking about that. I can't say when exactly we plan to introduce that, but it's definitely something we see coming also for us.
Great. Thank you.
Maybe I can as I said, I probably will come back to that point in the summary. This is my last slide actually before I come to the summary, just to add here a little bit more information about the options we see, and that's something that Gemalto already mentioned in his initial slide. So there's definitely also an option for us to think about database pricing, where we could distinguish between a model, I call it here qualitative. That means we let the customer decide which type of data the customer needs, process data, for example, machine data, or maybe inventory data. And then we have a license based on that, rather than, let's say, a fairly technical protocol to say we have an option for MQTT protocol. What I like about that idea is that it's really, I think, closely connected to the value that we provide. You know, the customer knows, well, am I interested in an application that needs inventory data or not? And then we have a really direct connect to the value and to the application based on such a model. And the last point, that's something that's, at least in some areas and some applications, common when looking at cloud pricing models common in the cloud, that we also can think about pricing our technology based on data volume, or maybe based on the number of requests that we see, basically the consumption or usage of our products and technology. It's last remark before I come to my summary, that's not even a complete list. You know, the more and more we move in this context of middleware, which I already mentioned, there may be even other options. The traditional enterprise middleware software vendors sometimes have a pricing based on the number of CPUs software is running on. From my perspective, that's fairly far out and not really an option for us, at least for the time being. It's rather those that I mentioned. Okay.
But I'll let you summarize, and then I have a couple of questions from the audience.
If you want to bring up these questions first, either way, I'll let you decide.
They're about the pricing. Again, everyone's very curious about your pricing models. Okay, so I'm reading someone who is from a company that does the smart waste solutions, and he says, please, can you shed some light on how you approach pilot pricing models? So before signing into a certain amount of years as a project, their customers like to have smaller trials. Do you have any unique approach to do that? And maybe that's more for us later on, but maybe you also have a question, have you dealt with this type of trial approach before?
Well, I'd say for that kind of situation, it's pretty much hands-on. I mean, it's then, I would say, rather up to the specific situation and sales to negotiate under these specific circumstances how we can come together and find a way how we deal with it. As I said, you know, right now we haven't adopted those options that I just said. We have this price list with price list entries. We may negotiate a rebate depending what we are talking on, but that's, let's say, tactical. It's not that we have some kind of strategic model to deal with that at this point of time.
Okay. I'll let you summarize. So many questions.
Okay. Yeah, so my summary. I guess for our data feed product family, I said we are in a software business here, selling software licenses since more than 10 years. It's fair to say that the opportunities that we see in the context of IoT and the monetization strategies we think about rather mean evolution than revolution. It doesn't mean that we are asking ourselves not fundamental questions, but there's really an evolutionary component to that, and that's how we look at it for the data feed product family. When we think about adding alternative pricing models, software as a service, or maybe database pricing, I would describe it probably rather as a soft transition, since we will continue to have traditional customers using our products not in an IoT context, not in combination with cloud applications. We need to serve those customers too. On the other side, we have customers, as said, who use cloud-based applications, these new pricing models. So it's rather likely that we give the customer a choice between a traditional pricing model and a new, more innovative pricing model. And last but not least, I mean, all that applies to the data feed product family. I'm not saying that this IoT and what we are discussing here with this big buzzword, it doesn't mean potentially big changes for us too. We have separate teams, small unit in our organization that's looking at entire new business opportunities, big data analytics, one candidate. And in that case, where we are, let's say, free from any legacy hardware business, of course, then we would be free, and it would be natural to adopt and start with one of these innovative pricing models right from the start.
Thank you, Christopher. I'm going to ask you one more question, but I wanted to tell the audience that there are several questions here about pricing models and licensing, and actually Jam is going to come back. He's going to come up now. I'm going to ask Christopher one last question and give presentation rights to Jam, because Jam is going to answer some of the questions that we've had about trials, about, and I'm going to read them out, about pay-per-use models, how they can be implemented. So Jam is going to go into some of the best practices that we've experienced. But just before as I hand this over to Jam, just one parting question from you, Christopher. We talk a lot about pricing. So have you encountered any companies who are customers who are specifically unhappy with your current pricing model, or how urgent is it that you feel that you need to transition, or are you sort of juggling this? Some of them are maybe more than others, or maybe you can shed some light on that.
No, I wouldn't say we have unhappy customers. As I said, we still sell to traditional customers, and they are happy with the pricing as it is. But on the other hand, you know, why cloud? Why is cloud successful? I mean, there are many factors, but I believe the financial aspect is key. Cloud is successful because it means customer can reduce capex. They can scale consumption and cost up and down in a very flexible way, and depending on need. And if that's true for software and the upper application layers that we just saw on this model, then that should also apply for the lower layers where we are playing. And so while we don't have unhappy customers, I really believe that adopting these new pricing models should give additional flexibility for the customer. And in the end, if you do it right, it should be a win-win situation for the customer and for us.
Thank you so much, Christopher. I'm going to hand over the presentation to Jam. And Jam, can you hear me? Or can we hear you?
Yes, I can.
Okay, we can hear you.
Yes,
So just as you jump in and give us your more of the implementation and methodology, a question already came up. How would we, or Gemalto, recommend companies to move from perpetual models to more subscription usage models, and would we recommend having a mix across our product suites of both? So can you just keep that in mind when you talk about the recommendations that we would have? Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Over to you.
So great. Hopefully the next few slides, and I'm cognizant of the time we have left, but I'll try to address those questions. If I sort of take the baton from where Dr. Anhalt left over, you'll see a lot of the themes he's talked about, and a lot of the the business models they've enabled really stem from this idea of controlling the software experience. So when you think about even enabling new business models and making the transition, it all stems from determining where you're looking to extract value. So if fundamentally there's this notion that whether all or some of your value is going to be derived from software, then certainly you need to think about how you control that software. I use the word control because historically a lot of licensing or license management softwares have been associated with enforcement, and the stigma with enforcement stems from sort of an anti-piracy culture, which is, hey, pay for what only legitimate users can buy it, and you don't allow access to somebody who's pirated your software. It's a whole different market segment that's relevant for. When you're looking at business models, you're looking more around controlling your software so that you can enable the right level of activation. You can control the software experience, which ties right into how you price for the software. Your software will behave differently as a subscription in the sense that if somebody doesn't renew their term, you have some decisions you have to make around whether you want to offer degraded functionality, whether you want to switch off functionality, start issuing warnings, true up customers, then enable new functionality based on a renewal. Is there different functionality if you do a 1-year license versus a 3-year license? All of those behaviors stem from putting some thought into how you control your software experience, and being able to extract that functionality out of your software and control it via licensing allows you to then control your company policy through electronic licenses. So let's touch a little bit on what the business advantages are here. I won't spend too much time on this because I think during the session before you really saw, based on all the different business models and the pricing models that are enabled, that there's a number of advantages here. But as you look through enabling functionality in software, and as you look to move from perpetual to subscription, a few of the things you want to think about are, differentiation. You avoid becoming commoditized. You're focusing more on software-based value propositions. In a perpetual model, you do have this notion of, what you buy is what you get, which is less conducive to market differentiation. Also being able to, I talked a little bit about control in the slide before, but being able to control what updates a customer gets, how the features are delivered, which again in a software world translates directly into speed. There's a huge difference in agility and speed when you can push an update over the wire onto your device rather than have to send out a field engineer or ship out a new device. And in the industrial IoT, when you start to enable new functionality via software, you can start building hardware that's almost got functionality that's good for what's usable now and a generation ahead, and being able to just add on functionality by enabling bits on the device, which allows you to enable new functions at a much faster rate than you would if you were now to think about shipping new hardware out. Also gives you a more predictable revenue stream when you move towards subscription. So when people ask, well, what's the benefits, the pros and cons, it's not a one-size-fits-all answer, because everybody's business is a little bit different. But there certainly is a certain level of predictability you get when you move to a subscription model. Now, one of your challenges is going to be making that shift, especially factors like how you compensate sales. Are you a public company, so you have to adjust earnings based on what your perpetual model has a different kind of revenue stream from a subscription. So there are other factors outside of just technology that go into making that transition that need to be considered. But certainly, there's a lot more flexibility when you've put a lot of that functionality and power in your software. And then you start thinking about, the scalability. When you've integrated all this into your back office software processes, and I'll touch on that in a moment here, now you've got a business that's built to scale, that's really operating and thinking like a software company. And this is a recurring theme that we hear quite often is, a lot of hardware companies needing to shift their culture into just thinking and behaving and operating like a software company. So there's a lot more than just technology that goes into this. I do want to touch really quickly on pay-per-use because it is definitely where a lot of the industry is going. But even though we always like to talk about the trends that are coming, we want to temper it a little bit as well. Everybody has it on their mind, but if you're not enabling it, don't panic either. Right? In a McKinsey survey that was done, about 80% of the respondents don't offer a pay-per-use or power by the hour, if you will, pricing model. A small amount, less than 10%, are planning an implementation. But what's interesting is, close to 50% said that it could be a relevant part of their business model. Now, if you think about, pay-per-use in the context of IoT, it's not something that you think right off the bat right now. People are more thinking about a subscription, but that's the next level up. It all comes down to getting more control over the software, enabling the value in your software. It's a natural tendency now towards shifting from subscription to what's ultimately, right, when you can build a business around, you only pay for what you use. You enable a different level of customer trust. And the biggest challenge in selling hardware and software is that negotiation with the customer around, well, what's the fair value price of what I should be selling? And pay-per-use goes a long way in enabling that. So it's definitely a very relevant business model to start thinking around because of all the changes that need to happen in order to enable it. You just want to be prepared from an infrastructure and product standpoint. Which kind of leads me into the notion of what your digital business architecture needs to look like. It's very different in terms of fulfillment, supply chain, tracking, back office systems when you're thinking of hardware versus software. With software, you get all the advantages we've talked about. They also come with a lot more complexity. There's more SKUs, there's more pricing models, there's more options, there's more dependencies. So you need to start thinking about how you interact with your customer. What does your customer portal look like now? Make it is it easy for a customer now to know what is it that I actually purchased? What am I entitled to? What are the associated products that I can get because I bought this feature? The popular example I often use is what we get from a lot of these e-commerce and shopping sites. If you go to an Amazon, it's very easy to look up what you purchased. It's easy to look up, and they now also use that very cleverly to give very targeted promotions around, hey, if you bought this, here's what people who bought this also bought. Based on your preferences, this is what you can buy. Now, this is very much a consumer model, but certainly if you start applying that kind of logic, especially with more data coming in around buying patterns and analytics, you can start thinking about what are the peripheral packages that would be interesting to you because you bought this software package. As companies get acquired and become part of larger organizations, there's additional software that potentially would have been either a competitor or somebody else in a field or a lateral software that might be quite relevant to your customer base. So being able to enable all of that through clever automation and good, well-constructed CRM systems, and then an e-commerce system that's suited to software and subscription-based sales. Moving from perpetual to subscription isn't just about figuring out what your right bundles and packages are, but it's making sure that your billing systems are able to support a subscription model. You're able to ship out invoices. Are you able to create the appropriate kind of web shop and allow a customer the right level of payment? And then there's the monetization aspect, which touches into managing the entitlements, creating product bundles, tracking all your usage data so that it's really easy for a customer to buy buy what they're licensed to, be able to purchase upsell licenses, be able to get upgrades, all part of the things that are expected when you're moving towards a subscription model. Just got a couple more here. One thing that I'd be remiss not to mention is, unlike a lot of other businesses, when you start moving from a hardware to a software-centric model, when you start thinking about licensing your software, this often stems from maybe a product management-driven initiative around wanting to price and package and sell the products differently. But it touches almost every department in the organization because realizing this vision requires IT and operations to be involved in actually enabling this. Finance needs to be involved in how you actually, recognizing revenue as you shift from, perpetual to subscription, or as you look to monetize software along with your hardware. There's different, revenue recognition processes. There's obviously an impact on sales and marketing and how you're pricing and promoting now software via just hardware, and then just the whole entire customer experience. It changes. It's a bit of a shift when you start to push the value of your software. You have to start thinking about how customers are going to obtain that software. A lot of these sometimes get overlooked because the initiatives to make the change are sometimes dominated by whichever department has the budget to push the initiative. But it's really important as you start looking towards monetizing your software to take this kind of 360-degree view and involve all these different the groups to make sure this is a real organizational commitment. So I'm sure there's questions. I'll just in summary kind of say that you always hear the market's changing. It's something that there's always industry analyst reports. There's always the new hype that's coming in. But this is definitely not just hype, right? If you start looking at the IoT, what it really means, if you narrow it down to me, it's connectivity, and it's the lowest cost of devices that allow us to realize products that a few years ago would just be science fiction. And that brings upon a whole new level of customer expectation, a whole new opportunity to do business in a different way. And for traditional device vendors, it's a wonderful opportunity that can be taken advantage of by really now honing in on the software experience that maybe wasn't so possible just a few years ago.
Thank you so much, Jam. And I know that you were rushed, and we actually are 5 minutes past the hour, which is I think already a challenge to our listeners. There are a few questions, and I'm going to address them offline just because I want to be respective of everyone's time. And so I want to say thank you to our presenters, to Jam and to Christopher. I found this very interesting, and I enjoyed the session, as I hope our audience has as well. As I said, when we started, a recording will be sent to everyone who has attended and registered, and you have my details, so please feel free to send any questions that you haven't had time to address directly over to me. So any parting words, Christopher, Jam, before we say goodbye?
Oh, thanks again from my side. Interesting, and it was fun for me too. I hope everyone enjoyed it.
Thank you, Christopher.
Yeah, likewise. I really appreciate the time, and always a pleasure.
Bye-bye, everyone. Have a great day. Thank you for joining.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.